A few days later, we are shown the Tanking Market. Sis asked, and this is the Tanking Market, which is run by their sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer and the sect of the Green Mountains. It was her first time here. Lai Fan noticed that he knows the local places and they can walk together. He will show her everything. The girl ignored him and ran up to Zio and offered him a walk together. The protagonist replied that he was not particularly interested in the market. Tai walked ahead of everyone and turned around and told everyone that they had not come here to rest. Their main task is to maintain order in the market together with the disciples of the Green Mountain sect. Immediately, we are shown a man who saw Captain Tan. He smiled and asked why he was here. Tai greeted Manager Lai and told him that he had brought a group of disciples from their sect who would soon begin patrolling and apologized for the trouble. Li asked what kind of concern he was talking about. How could he not trust the disciples from such a noble sect, and laughed. Lin said that you need to be more careful. Although the Green Mountain sect is quite small, their sects have been maintaining friendly relations for a long time. They must do everything in their power not to spoil this friendship. Told Captain Tang and Zhu Ming that they would go to the North Street. There's a lot of work there right now. Li then noted that from that moment on, they would come under his command. They shouldn't worry, he won't treat them badly in any way. Tai told Zhu to follow him, who in turn was still eating, but agreed. They quickly flew up at great speed. Li then told the girls that they would go to East Street. Only noble people go there, so everything will be quite calm. Lin took Sis by the hand and she wanted to object because she wanted to go with the protagonist. But Lin told her to forget about Zio for a while. She'll take care of her this time. After that, Li told the protagonist to proceed to South Street. The protagonist wondered why he was alone. Li replied that there were 4 streets, but there are only 6 of them. Someone will have to go one at a time anyway. The protagonist turned around and realized that he needed to go to South Street, and Lai Fan was smiling maliciously behind him. When Zio left, Fan laughed and thanked his second uncle. He added that he would definitely put in a good word for him to the master. Li replied that he should not worry about it. They are family and should help each other. There is always chaos on South Street. Even 10 warriors can't keep everything under control. In addition to this, he made an agreement with one person who promised to make a little mess there. There's no way this guy can handle it. And they will go to West Street and mark the meeting well. He also forgot to say that there are several beauties there, and Lai Fan thanked his uncle once again and laughed. The protagonist was standing around the corner and heard all this and figured out how to act, looking at the rat running by. He wondered if it was a family of rats. After that, we are shown the southern street of the Tanking Market, where there were bandits, dealers, and fights everywhere. Immediately, the protagonist landed on the roof and addressed the citizens. He showed them the badge and told them that he was a true disciple of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer, who was assigned to keep order on this street. The man began to resent that the sect had sent another one. It is clear from him that he is just a beginner practitioner. Another guy asked how long the last one lasted. This one will cry too and run back to his master. The girl didn't even know. He didn't seem stable to her. After that, we are shown 3 guys who discussed the plan. The first one noted that Mr. Lai had told them not to listen to what he was saying there. They will be well paid if they cause him problems and they understand him. The protagonist noted that now he will explain the rules that he will have to follow. Zio began to say that firstly, from today on, the South Street tax will be reduced to 10% and no one is allowed to pay more. From his words, all those who doubted the protagonist were greatly surprised. Secondly, since he is responsible for this street, there will be no checks on the origin of the goods. Now they will be able to sell their goods freely. The protagonist absolutely does not care if their product is black or legal. They can sell anything. Anyone who dares to tell him about the old rules, he will consider a violator. Everyone was already surprised and pleased. And thirdly, he has only one prohibition, which will apply to absolutely everyone. No one is allowed to take away and profit at the expense of others. It will be punishable by death. If there are those who disagree with his rules, then they should come forward. The crowd of people started shouting that everyone agreed with this, of course, and rejoiced. The guy with the blindfold asked his brother if they would perform and panicked a lot. He hit his brother and asked what other against and if he was tired of living. The protagonist, seeing that everyone was satisfied, declared the South Street of the Tanking Market open for trade. The next day, a guy came with a bag and said that it was better to get rid of this thing as soon as possible, otherwise they might start asking questions. The guy was walking to South Street. He heard that South Street is not the best place for bidding, but recently only here you can sell this kind of stuff. He has no choice. Immediately, someone put his hand on the guy's shoulder and he turned back. He asked who they were and a bag was quickly thrown over him, and they tied him up so that he wouldn't try to take it off. Then they took him somewhere that made him panic. They took the bag off him and he asked with anger and fire in his eyes what they were doing and that he would deal with everyone now. When he saw that he was surrounded by big guys, he immediately stopped talking. The guy got down on his knees and said that he would start begging for mercy now and laughed. The protagonist was sitting on the throne and asked how much he would sell what he brought here. He would buy it. The guy was delighted and replied that the price was for 500, but immediately lowered the price to 400. The protagonist immediately snapped his fingers. The guy got scared and let the price go up to 300 more. He has only recently started bidding, so he is not yet aware of the local price tags. He didn't need the money, he just asked to be released. The big guy threw a bag at his feet and the protagonist explained that there were 500 spiritual stones, and not one less. He can even check for himself. The guy was surprised and reached for the bag. Taking it, the protagonist told him to tell all his friends that if there are problems with this kind of product, they could safely contact him. He should just tell them to come to South Street and ask for Brother Feng. He will accept whatever they bring. The guy agreed with him. He has a lot of connections and he will bring everyone here. The protagonist said that he could go, and the guy thanked Feng and ran away. A week later, 3 guys came to South Street. The first guy asked if this was the place that Senior Jin was talking about. Another noted that it doesn't look like anything. The guys approached the seller and asked if there was anything better here. The seller told them to put on the password. The guy replied that they had come here to meet Brother Feng from South Street. The seller took the seal and said that customers had arrived here and they should open the door. Immediately, the door opened. All 3 were very surprised and the seller told them to go in there. Looking at this, they were just shocked. A month later, we are shown the flower house of West Street. Someone reported to Lee that the disciples of the Star Sky Inquirer of North and East Streets had already completed their tests. Lee asked how things were going on South Street. The guy replied that it was a mess. Not only has South Street become unmanageable lately, but there are also rumors that goods of unknown origin are being sold there. Lee laughed and asked his nephew if he had heard that. The protagonist will not cope with his ordeal in any way. Fan thanked his uncle. He wanted to see how he could get out of this situation. Lee then stood up and told him to go. Lee added that Fan should go get the other students. We need to go there together so that they too can see the inconsistency of this arrogant boy, and the Fan agreed. After that, they show us South Street and that the whole group B was heading there. Tai was angry and noted that it was even worse here than in ordinary mortal markets. He got even more angry and shouted, "Where is the person responsible for this street?" and for Xiao Feng to come out. And from his shout, everyone was surprised and turned around. Immediately, the protagonist came out of the crowd and noted that he was thinking who had come to them, and it turns out to be Captain Tang and Manager Lai. There was already a crowd behind the protagonist and he asked what fate had brought them to South Street and how he could be useful. Lai Fan shouted, "Why did he need so many people?" The protagonist replied that they were discussing questions about a small repair here, so everyone was already nearby. He asked what the problem was. Lee coughed to get attention and said that he had heard rumors that South Street was not paying extra taxes and was violating the trading rules of their market. Xiao Feng, after all, is responsible for this street and asked if he hadn't seen what was going on here. Sissy drooped a little because of Xiao Feng. The protagonist replied to Manager Lee that he had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. He asked the people if any of them had violated the laws of market trading. Everyone started saying that they are the most obedient in the market. They do everything according to the laws and no one complains. And they denied everything. The protagonist then noted that Mr. Lee should be more careful with the accusations, because he can complain for defamation. Lee noted that people of the 3 teachings and 9 movements were gathered here and asked if he was afraid to embarrass his master in front of all of them. Someone in the crowd shouted back at Lee that it was none of his business. Lee got angry and asked who said it and ordered him to come out and say it to his face, since he was so brave. Immediately, someone threw a sword at him. Lee didn't even have time to do anything and was already preparing for death. But at the last moment, he managed to create a shield and block the sword's attack. Immediately, there was someone behind him. Tai asked the manager if he was okay and held him so that he wouldn't fly off. Lai asked who dared to attack a disciple of the Green Mountain sect and ordered them to come out now. It was Myoking and asked if it was already impossible to make fun, but everyone was surprised. The protagonist was also surprised and did not understand where Su Myoking's sister came from. Lee asked who she was and why she attacked him. Myo started twirling the sword around herself and laughingly noted that she was just a passerby who didn't like that he started bullying Brother Zai. So she decided to stand up for him. The big guy noted that this Myo knows a lot about people. And the other girl was a little angry because she also had feelings for the protagonist. Lee called her a stupid woman and said that today he would hammer into her head how to treat respectable people. He immediately started running forward. He created a fiery fist and rushed forward. Lai attacked her, but Myo just blocked the attack with her shield. Tai decided to keep an eye on it for now and not interfere. Mai touched the sword and asked, "And that's all he's capable of?" Lai saw that Myo was holding a top-class spiritual weapon and was surprised. She immediately began to create a huge fiery phoenix in the sky. The protagonist was a little scared and noted that it was no longer funny. She puts too much spiritual strength into this blow. Immediately, she launched a phoenix at him, which was flying at high speed. Lee got scared and thought he was finished. The phoenix was already near Lee's face, and he only managed to cover himself because of the strong flash. Then he was surprised that he hadn't died and looked ahead. There was an elder in front of Lee who blocked the explosion, and therefore he was surprised. The elder asked how it happened that at such a young age she, a girl, became so cruel. Lee told the elder that she had suddenly attacked and wounded him. He had to teach her a lesson. The elder turned to him and asked what he was talking about, because he couldn't even cope with a young girl. He should go back to his room and think about it carefully, and Lee panicked a little and agreed. Then the elder noted that she dared to attack his disciple. He could not just leave it like that and advised her not to resist and go with him to their sect to receive a fair punishment. Otherwise, the protagonist interrupted him and asked what else and what he was going to do with the disciple of their sect. Immediately, the elder looked towards the protagonist. Xiao Feng went to Mayo and asked what she was doing here. Mayo said that she had successfully moved to the stage of laying the foundations. So she decided to take a little rest and come here to see if anyone was bullying her youngest. The protagonist was surprised and replied that he then congratulated her on her successful breakthrough. Mayo laughed and said that it couldn't be otherwise, she was his eldest. The elder was surprised that she was able to break through to the foundation stage at such a young age. She is one of the true disciples of the sect of the Starry Inquirer of Heaven, but she was the one who first injured a person from their sect, so even if her master personally showed up here, the advantage would be on their side. The elder then coughed and addressed the two. He said that since she was from the sect of the Starry Inquirer of Heaven, she certainly shouldn't have attacked his disciple. The Heavenly Inquirer sect and their Green Mountain sect have always maintained a good relationship. Therefore, he would like to receive an explanation personally from her master. The protagonist turned to Mayo and noted that she had gone a little overboard with that last punch. The girl stuck her tongue out at him in response and explained that this was a new trick that she had learned quite recently, so she had not yet learned how to control it properly. The protagonist noted that the elder was right. They shouldn't have gone that far. Lee laughed angrily, which he did admit, and it was quite expected. Sissy began to worry about Xiao Feng again. Bai Fan laughed and thought that now they would watch him explain to his master this chaos going on in South Street. The protagonist noted that therefore, for his own good, he would not ask why his disciple tried to frame him during guard training. The elder was surprised and asked again. He got very angry and called him a puppy and asked how dare he mock him. He noted that they do not understand in a good way. Then he would have to teach him a lesson instead of their master. He released a strong aura. The protagonist even had to cover himself, and Mayo asked him not to worry because she assured him that she would deal with it. She wanted to do something, but couldn't and asked what was going on. The protagonist replied that he was fine. He felt that this elder had done it on purpose. Immediately, the elder asked Xiao what demonic spells he used and why he couldn't move, and the protagonist was surprised. Then everyone looked up and did not understand why it suddenly snowed in the middle of summer. The other guy noted that he couldn't move either. The elder looked up and said that he did not know which of the masters of the Heaven Star Inquirer sect had come to them, but he was the elder of the outer circle of the Green Mountain sect. We are shown the legs of a girl who, descending from the sky, asked the elder who he wanted to teach a lesson to there. It was the master of the floating snowflake palace, Liu Hanyan. The elder was simply shocked when he saw her. She went downstairs and noted that she had recently needed some medicinal herbs, so she asked Xiao Feng to look for them for her. Now she even wondered what market rules he had violated. She asked me to tell her, because she is also interested. The elder laughed and replied that they were just joking, and Xiao did not break any rules. Han Yan asked the protagonist to extend his hand, and he was very surprised and even asked again. She gave him a kind of talisman, and the protagonist recognized it and was very surprised. The girl noted that since Xiao had not violated any rules, they would figure it out for themselves, and she leaves and immediately disappears. The protagonist laughed and noted that Han was as usual. Mayo turned to Xiao about Guang Han, because she was interested. The protagonist understood this and replied so that she would not think anything. He just helped her with something one day. The protagonist then turned to the elder of the Green Mountain sect. Immediately, the elder began to beat Lee. Lai started crying and assured the elder that he didn't know anything. But with all his might, he again removed the one that flew away. The elder called him a bastard, because he almost said goodbye to his life because of him. Then he smiled and asked Mr. Xiao if he had hit him hard enough and punished him. The protagonist replied to him to continue. The elder understood him and began to deliver a quick series of attacks on the chin. The protagonist was closely watching the beating, and Mayo asked him if everything would be fine for sure. Xiao replied that he understood the seriousness of his student's action better than he did, so it was all right. Then he noted that he thought she had had enough fun and whether it was time for her to return to the Infinity Palace. Mayo understood him and asked him not to tell Dad and Mom about what happened today. Immediately, the girl jumped onto the house and then pushed off and flew home. Then the protagonist decided to approach his team. He apologized to them for keeping them waiting, because he had to sort out some business. Tai replied that it was okay. It seemed to him that there had been a misunderstanding and apologized for blaming him without understanding the situation. The protagonist waved back and replied that it was not worth apologizing. It was just that the master of the palace asked him once again to keep his head down and not attract too much attention, and Tai understood him. And then he said that he would take care of the rest and would not be disturbed anymore. Lin then turned to Sis, who blushed and said that she had a strong competitor and suggested that she find another guy. She thinks he won't be able to compete with the master of the floating snowflake palace. Sis was confused and asked what she was talking about and replied that she hadn't even thought about it. Lin smiled at her answer and asked if she really hadn't thought about it, and then asked what she was thinking when she was looking at her so intently, and the girl didn't know what to answer. Then everyone came up to the protagonist, and Lai Fan was angry that he had helped the master of the palace and thought that he was now untouchable. He added that as soon as the test is over, he will make sure that his reputation falls below the baseboard. Thanks to Liu Hanyan's intervention, the rest of the guard's trial went smoothly. A certain guy was flying on a sword and immediately he was approached and called. The student was surprised and looked back. He was informed that he had exceeded the speed limit and his fine was 20 spirit stones. Now, no one dared to reproach Xiao Feng for the rules that he set on his street. After looking at the gemstone, the protagonist noted that now there is no need to worry about the test and it is better for him to do his training. The days passed quickly, and the trial of the guards came to an end. After that, everyone gathered in the square and the disciples of the sect of the Starry Inquirer of the Sky greeted the masters of the palaces. Huangling Zhenren greeted everyone. Today their first year of training in the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer is coming to an end. From that day on, they will be able to leave the mountain and rightfully act on behalf of their sect. After that, we are shown the protagonist, who was already at the 9th stage of the Kai cultivation stage. He finally broke through to the 9th step, and now he can go down the mountain. Huangling Zhenren added that according to the rules, today each student can take out one student for a training fight, but powerful techniques are prohibited. Peace and quiet between students should not be disturbed. Huangling asked them which of them wanted to exercise this right. Lai Fan came out and told the head that he would like to challenge someone. The head noted that he is not bad. Fan was able to break through to the foundation stage in a year and asked who Fan wanted to challenge. Lai Fan smiled maliciously and replied that he was challenging Xiao Feng's disciple. Su got angry and squeezed his chair hard, saying that it was nonsense. He did not understand how a disciple at the foundation stage could challenge a disciple at the Kai cultivation stage. It would just be a mockery of someone who is weaker. Huangling Zhenren laughed and asked where he was in such a hurry. He had not forgotten that the challenge could be refused. Su felt that he just wanted to make fun of their infinity palace. Immediately, the protagonist said that he was accepting the challenge, which made Su very surprised. Huangling Zhenren was also shocked. The head scratched his beard and asked if he was sure about it. The protagonist explained that the world is big and it is not a fact that he will always come across opponents of the same stage as him. Xiao personally wants to check how big the gap in strength is between the students of the stage of laying the foundations and improving Kai. How could he turn down such a chance? On the contrary, he should be grateful to Brother Li for giving him such an opportunity. Su got even more angry and pointed at him and asked what kind of nonsense this kid was talking about. Huangling Zhenren laughed and noted that they had all been slightly irrational in their youth. Hanyan smiled and said that she thought he had every chance. She decided to bet this top-class treasure on Xiao Feng's victory. Han turned to Guangling and asked if he wanted to support the bet. The man was surprised when he saw the bead of cold and noted that it was a good thing. He will have to put up an equally valuable treasure. He took out a talisman and holding it in his hand said that if Xiao Feng really won, then this talisman would become hers. Han looked at the arena and replied that they would live and see. The guys entered the arena and the judge said that there was only one rule: you can't kill, and asked if they agreed to such conditions. Lai Fan smiled maliciously and asked the protagonist not to worry, because he promises that he will not beat him to death. In fact, he thought that he had already reached the stage of laying the foundations, so his victory was already a foregone conclusion. The referee announced the start of the battle and immediately Lai Fan moved forward. He quickly jumped away from the protagonist for a long distance. Su saw this and was surprised that Fan broke the distance with Xiao. Fan understood that Xiao was good at close combat, and he specialized in long-range attacks, so first he needed to break the distance between them as quickly as possible. Immediately, the protagonist took out his sword and Lai Fan did not understand what he was going to do. At that moment, the protagonist stuck the sword into the ground, which had already begun to emit a certain aura. 100 different energy swords appeared immediately. Then the protagonist flew up and a seal appeared behind him, from which swords also appeared. After that, he folded his fingers and ordered them to fly. All the swords flew straight forward with incredible speed. Lai Fan started laughing and said that he thought there would be something more interesting and called him an idiot. He quickly slapped his hand on his arm to use the force. A boulder appeared from the ground, which shielded Lai Fan from the swords. Guangling Zhenren noted that the Heavenly Sword Punishment is the most powerful sword technique that a master of the Kai cultivation stage can use. However, despite its power, it consumes too much spiritual energy. Even a student of the foundation stage can only maintain this technique for a few breaths. After this, Xiao Feng will definitely run out of steam and lose. He then told Han Yan that he thought her cold bead would soon become his and laughed. Han asked why there was such a rush, because the fight was not over yet. Lai Fan stood behind the wall and asked that the protagonist decided that by putting everything he had into one attack, he could defeat him and laughed. He wanted to see how long he could last like that. As soon as the technique dissipates, Xiao will fall. The protagonist then told Li Fan that the warm-up was over. He hoped that Fan would last longer than he thought. Fan got angry and asked what he was talking about. The protagonist folded his arms and the swords quickly flew forward. Guangling Zhenren looked at this and was surprised again. All the swords flew into the boulder with incredible speed and force and literally destroyed it. After a moment, they punched through it, and Lai Fan was surprised. Immediately they hit him and he flew away. Lai Fan lost consciousness and the judge announced that Xiao Feng had won. All the students were surprised when they saw the Heavenly Sword Punishment technique. The guy asked how long he had been maintaining its effect and the other replied that at least 20 breaths. The guy was just in shock. He didn't understand how. After all, he is at the peak stage of the Kai cultivation stage, and he can last no more than 3 breaths. He didn't understand how he did it and got very angry, because it infuriated him, and the girls literally fell in love with him. Han then turned to Guangling Zhenren and he turned around and asked again. Immediately, he understood everything and gave her the talisman. Han noted that his mascot is really good. At the very least, he will be able to severely injure the master of the immortal infant stage. She thanked him for such a wonderful gift. She gladly accepts it, and the man laughed and assured her that it was nothing. Then Guangling Zhenren turned to Su and noted a little bit angrily that he did not think that his disciple would be so strong. He was really lucky to have him. Su noted that he had nothing to do with it. I didn't understand anything myself. After that, everyone was in the Infinity Palace and Su told the protagonist to talk. Xiao held out his sword and said that this blade was the secret of how he was able to use the Heavenly Sword Punishment technique for so long. He had previously placed a technique formation on his blade and imbued it with spiritual energy. The guy noted that after activating the technique, the previously accumulated spiritual energy was first consumed and only then his. And before he could finish, he noted that it was brilliant. The girl added that, however, not everyone can do this method. Such a subtle and complex formation requires deep knowledge and skill in this field. And this is not something that can be achieved only by a high stage of cultivation. Lin did not think that Xiao Feng had talent in this area and turned to Mio King, who was surprised. His mother said that his cultivation is clearly lagging behind Mio, but he makes up for it with his sharp mind. She should have followed his example and started studying hard too. The girl did not understand why everything had come to this again. The protagonist folded his hands and told the master that he had one request for him and he should listen to him. Su noted that today he defended the honor of the Infinity Palace and showed his best side, so he is ready to reward him. Naturally, within reason, the protagonist explained that he would like to go down from the mountains for a while and be alone. Mio was angry and shocked. She asked if he liked living in the Infinity Palace. Su noted that this is certainly commendable. However, he is still too weak, and there are many dangers waiting for him below. He'd better give up on this idea. Xiao Feng said again that he was very grateful to him for his care. However, the uncut jade was still just a piece of stone. He would like to pass this test with dignity and finally grow up. He hopes that the master will understand his intentions. After that, the protagonist left the temple. He noted that he was released after all. It's a bit of a pity to part with them, but it will be easier to carry out his further plans alone. Immediately, someone called the protagonist, which made him very surprised. He began to turn his head quickly, because he heard Han Yan's voice, and then thought that he had just imagined it. Immediately, he saw a small flash and did not understand what else it was. A talisman flew out of his clothes, which made him even more surprised. The protagonist did not understand what was happening to his jade pendant. Immediately, this pendant began to spin. A moment later, a certain little girl appeared, and he was surprised. The protagonist looked at her, and the girl told him that Xiao Feng should immediately go to the floating snowflake palace.